Let's focus on what the president has recently done, which is sending a memo to the speakers of parliament, both the National Assembly and the Senate. And he says, he is taking an unprecedented move, informed by the wisdom of the Supreme Court that a president cannot initiate constitutional amendments. And he says, I have some ideas which I'd like to bring to your attention, which then you can maybe take to your assemblies and let them be discussed. And he's talking about, make a constitutional amendment to create an office and a structure for the official opposition. Have some amendments in legislation to entrench and have a constituency development fund, a Senate oversight fund, and the other one is NGAF, the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, entrenched into our laws and our constitution. What's the other proposal?
The two-thirds?
Yes. Let's see how we can create a formula in the constitution that allows us to nominate members into the National Assembly the same way we are nominating members into the Senate to meet the two-third gender principle, and also in the other one, the county assemblies. So he's basically saying, how about, and he's coming up with specific ideas that he's taking to Parliament. Is that a good or a bad thing? When you see now the president saying, I've been thinking about this thing, and maybe we could, take this particular direction.
It's interesting that some of us were very much pro BBI, and I think I sat here and we had many conversations about this. The thing is this, that sometimes in this country, the medicine is good, but we don't like the doctor. And therefore, we will not take the medicine. Now, we've gotten to the point that the people who didn't want the medicine because of the doctor are prescribing the same medicine to the country. Now, there are some ideas there that need to be taken seriously. Number one, in my view, is the idea of legitimizing not the leader of opposition, but the people who are in opposition. There is a certain sense that this country has that if you are on one side of the rift, then your representation, your ideology, and what you believed in when you went into the ballot is ignored simply because your ideas did not meet the threshold of majority. Now, is that an important discussion to have? Yes, it is. There's other discussion that is very important. We bequeathed ourselves a constitution that says our parliament is not even legally well constituted unless we meet the two-third gender rule. Now, ever since we promulgated the constitution, parliament has consistently failed at meeting this particular rule. In fact, to the end where Maraga wrote a letter to the president saying, dissolve this thing, and we've not had the solution. However, we still need to look at how many people we will load onto the National Assembly. Can we have a National Assembly that is going to have 400 odd people, three-quarters of whom will never say a word in parliament? Is that the way to go? So the issue is this, that this for me is a revival of BBI. Simply because there is a need in this country to address certain issues. So on that, I agree with the president. The issue that is there is that some of those solutions being prescribed will lead to an even bigger government, and unfortunately, we will not get value for money. There are so many MPs, over 100 MPs in the last 5 years, who said nothing in the Hansard. Now, those who said nothing in the Hansard,
That's
some
on
of
the
them
floor
got,
of the House,
yes,
in plenary.
Yes, in plenary.
They participate in committees and committee meetings.
But my dear brother, have you ever seen that plenary? How many people are usually there?
Not many.
Okay.
But they don't even attend.
That's my point.
Not many.
That's my point. You see, the problem with the Kenyan parliament, and Arnold had begun talking about this, Kenyan parliament has become an extension of the executive. It does not do oversight. And the other thing that they want to do is abandon oversight and go back to CDF. I am one of those people who believes that CDF should not exist. The reason why we have ugatuzi, why we have governors, supersedes the need for for CDF, and I know this is unpopular, but give us that 100 million to governors, let them do what they're supposed to do. Take more money out of the executive at the national level and give it to the executive at the county level, and let the people elect people who they think have executive know-how to manage those funds, because the qualification of an MP by design is different from the qualification of a governor, as much as they fake their degrees. That very qualification tells you that the people who wrote the constitution and what we bequeathed ourselves is we agreed an MP can represent us without education. Why? Because some of us don't have education. But you cannot then bequeath that MP 100 million shillings to run at the chagrin of not being able to go to Parliament and hold oversight over the government.
City wants to react. Okay, I propose that we go through these things this way. All right. So there are 4 issues.
Yeah.
There is gender. There is CDF and GAF and the Senate Fund. All right. There is Musalia Mudavadi addressing Parliament. Okay. Parliamentary oversight of the executive. Right. And then there's a final one, which is the opposition. Okay. So now that we are at that point of the affirmative action and the CDF and the Senate Fund, let's deal with that as an issue. CT,
You know, the
what's your view on that?
my view is simply this. I hear what Mark is saying. Even at the level of it being theoretical, it's faulty. It's faulty in this sense. The thing that I have seen with our devolved units is that the bulk of the governors we have do not have the capacity to actually govern. They may be good politicians, people may even like them, but they actually don't know what to do with the position they have. And that is shown by the mismanagement, not my thinking. What the Auditor General presents, the number of cases with the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, they're just explaining where the money went, how to, just basic. Now, Mark is saying we give them more money.
No, but you see,
The money they have,
but the function, you see, listen, if you hire an accountant in your firm and you went through the process of hiring them and they're a useless accountant, the function of the office is not made useless by the owner. The vision of having a governor is that they are capable of doing that. Unfortunately, the people who hire governors are... I don't want to say that word. Yes, they're bad recruiters. But those same people who are bad recruiters, you do not solve the problem of bad recruiting by letting them then choose MPs who are also executive of 100 million, because those same MPs have had cases.
You know,
Yes,
God
they
does not,
have.
Eric.
Yes,
City
they have.
City here said that when I said that democracy is like milk,
yes,
that is Western thinking. He then comes back and exemplifies what I would still call Western thinking. You know, people elect people they think that they share values with. When the nation chose to go the hustler way, a majority of them, even if it's a simple majority, related at value level with them. Let's go back to CDF.
I wish it were that
I
simple.
have challenged CDF because I know you can do a technical paper that relates to the death of Parliament to CDF. Because you see, when we did restructuring of our governance, we did away with imperial presidency. And we believed that Parliament, by definition, is a reflection of the people. That when you see Parliament, normally the definition of Parliament would be that it's the manifestation of people as a government.
Yep.
When you look at Parliament, you can see the manifestation of the people as a government. And we gave them a lot of powers, knowing too well that we are doing away with places where individuals exist and that Parliament will do much better. What we are shying away from saying is that a lot of the changes we want to do are as a result of the failure of Parliament. What is the origin of CDF? We tried CDF. CDF for us was a pilot project. If you look at the Naivasha transcripts and even during the Bomas process, a lot of it, CDF was used as a pilot project to sell devolution, that it could work. It was not supposed to stay there forever. Once you have come to a sunset of a policy, you change. But I can tell you that CDF has bastardized Parliament. We speak about a third of our budget going to waste being stolen, some just being misused and everything else. That is the function of Parliament.
Yeah.
But because the voter has now been used, however much you say that governors will steal money, have you ever seen anyone jailed because of CDF? In any day?
No, I haven't actually.
Do you know why?
No,
Because Parliament gives, as in allocates budget. The Parliament we have is no longer a late endorser to the budget-making process. Parliament, as we have it now, is a budget-making body, an active one. Budget goes to Parliament 3 times before it even gets to the people. So they are part and parcel of it. So they allocate money. Why we separate functions is because you cannot audit yourself. I can tell you 100%, if I had money and I chose that these I will use as fuel, and somehow you asked me for tea and I gave you tea when we meet out there, I will explain to myself and I will understand. I therefore cannot audit myself. So, because the same Parliament that allocates itself budget, and then it is supposed to audit itself. Remember that the Office of the Auditor General is an appendage of Parliament. You cannot do oversight without Parliament. These guys have deliberately ensured that that particular office doesn't have sufficient resources, doesn't have enough staff. It's always frustrated.
And it's always auditing books 3 years behind.
Yes, that's what I'm telling you, it's late, deliberately, on Parliament's doing. So parliamentarians have stopped being parliamentarians, and they have chosen, and like I told you, 100% of the parliamentarians we have are just CDF managers masquerading as legislators.
And you're blaming this on CDF.
And yes, it is CDF because the shortest way of going to Parliament is promising heaven through CDF or just being an MP and running CDF so well. If you got them in spaces where they actually are very free to speak, they will tell you that the key to Parliament is CDF. And the concept of representation is is actually a bigger concept, quite difficult to explain here in one sitting. It's a bigger thing. Legislation is so big, a lot of these problems. 5 times Parliament threw out any legislation on Article 27.8 and Article 100. Not worked on until this particular time as we speak. Even as we speak about gender, we've not spoken about the SIGs, the 5 groups in Article 100. Of course, women, youth, persons with disabilities, marginalized, and the minorities. We have not dealt with them. Even as we talk about 27.8, we are not talking about this other group also. That is a challenge.
So Arnold, let me just pause you there, because there's a point you're making that I don't want to be lost.
Yeah.
Part of the reason parliamentarians do not participate in Parliament and actively do legislation is because it is more valuable for them to go to the counties and manage CDF than it is to sit in Parliament and actually do their work. And the reason why every time we watch TV, Parliament is empty is because, and I can tell you for a fact, MPs have a seat in their CDF headquarters, and what they do is they make sure they are seen when bursaries are being given out. They make sure they are seen when a building is being done, and therefore,
a road is being gravelled.
And we even have their pictures next to these buildings. Now, for as long as CDF exists, let me tell
Parliament
you,
will never be Parliament.
Let me read an excerpt of what the memo by the president said. All right. He said, "In my days in Parliament, I served when there was no CDF and also served when there was CDF. Localized problems often demand expeditious local interventions. CDF empowers legislators to perform their function of representation more effectively by keeping them in touch with the pulse of their constituencies. The CDF also makes the constituency a forum for continuous engagement on critical issues and effective mobilization to solve problems in the spirit of collective action." Now, my translation of that is basically saying the same thing that you're saying, Mark. The MP is visible on the ground. Visible on the ground, number one, getting feedback from the constituents on what do you people want? What are the issues? Where are your pain points? And how can I effectively begin the journey of solving that issue? Not by being the manager, but by being a patron of the CDF. That's what I heard. No. Being a patron of the CDF and channeling the funds towards the solution. 1, representation. It's not enough. The next thing that I need to do is go back to Parliament and in that budget and make sure that money for roads comes, money for power comes, money for this and the other comes.
Through CDF?
Not through CDF, but
Eric,
through legislation and representation.
Let me ask you a question. Let's just be very logical.
Yes.
As an MP, you have control and direct input on 3 trillion shillings. Okay?
Yes.
The mental acuity, strength, and focus that is required to effectively allocate 3 trillion shillings is a lot.
Yes.
If you manage that well, it will be a matter of course that you will not need 100 million because you've properly allocated 3 trillion.
Yes.
But I will tell you the problem with the human mind. If you give me a mountain I cannot swallow, I will take a small hill I can climb. So let me explain to you. Our MPs have no clue what is happening in 3 trillion. They want to struggle with 100 million because it is easier to manage.
I want to put it the other way
And
around.
that-
I want to put it
and
the
that,
other way
Eric,
around. The people, the citizens, will not listen to an MP who comes and says, we've allocated X amount of money which will go to the Kenya Roads Board, and then the Kenya Roads Board will give that money to the Kenya Rural Roads Authority, and the Kenya Rural Roads Authority will come and do the road. Or we've allocated X amount of money that will go to the Ministry of Interior. The Ministry of Interior will put that money into the police service. The police service will allocate money to come and build a police station or a gate to a police station.
What Eric is saying,
They will see directly. Can you start? Can we begin by seeing, all right, there's a gate to the school. There's a fence to the police
Mark is
station.
saying, and we do not want to accept, is that CDF is a distraction.
Yes.
And that if MPs were to properly do legislation and oversight, they will be so busy, they will not even have a weekend to go to the constituency so easily. When we talk about 3 trillion.
So they will not do the presentation.
I have had an opportunity to actually sit on boards and work within government spaces. Absorbing as little as 100 million, leave alone a billion. The instruments, the tools, and the processes that are required to absorb 100 million in implementation are so tedious that is why you hear a lot of departments wanarudisha pesa.
The absorption rate is at 20%.
And that is why a lot of money is spent badly between April
And July.
and July. Because now people want to allocate money, they don't want to get to take back
to
money
treasury.
because there's a penalty when you take back money. Then the next budget we give you, we will do less.
But I have to ask this question.
Yeah.
What then are we talking about here? Are we talking about a system we put in place, you said it was experimental, that has outlived its time? Are we talking about the capacity for the individuals who are elected to actually do what is required of them? Are we talking about the character of the individuals that we see evolving and them becoming what they are? What really are we talking about?
Now, when you're doing critical factor analysis, you just have to ask, I saw that 5 times. So that. The reason people do things is not always the first answer they give. They don't sometimes even don't know that is
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not considered.
It's not considered. So critical factor analysis. So let's just ask, why do MPs need CDF?
So that they can.
You will say that so that they can actually do
the needs
development
of
on the
the people on
ground,
the ground.
and then so that by the time you get to the 5th, so that you get the real reason, and that is a politics of laziness where MPs do not want to do their job.
Yes.
So we are saying let's do critical factor analysis, and Parliament is not doing its job. As a nation, we are in the shit we are in because Parliament has refused to do its job.
So that
Why?
And you know,
Honorable
this is the
member,
thing.
that's unparliamentary language.
Right. And I think the question here
It's a situation
We are
of
in the quagmire that we are in.
I think the conversations, because we say these are really important conversations to have. And also, if we look at that critical thinking, a lot of them, we talk about establishment conversation, is that as we establish the conversation, the reason then why we are doing that is to say we've pointed the arrow at the problem. That must offshoot towards the solution. Now, we know that we're in the doldrums. It is clear from what you're saying that certain things are happening so that other things can happen.
Yeah.
For me, it's always been that a lot of people are looking for longevity of the situation, political expediency, for them to remain at the center of power, etc.,
Yes,
etc.
power for the sake
Because
of power.
there comes a lot of rewards, monetary, etc. But if we're saying that we're looking towards a progressive government, if we're looking towards progressive development, that there are certain things then that must happen. And the question is right now, in what direction must we go? Who oversights the oversighters, the overseers?
Let me offer first an understanding of the problem Kenya finds itself in. There's a little Bible story that I find fantastic. This woman is bent over backwards, right? She's so bent, she sees the world upside down.
Which Bible are we talking about?
No, you remember the bent woman? She was bent over?
I'm yanking your crack.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
So this woman is in the presence of Jesus, God himself. She never asked once to be healed. Because sometimes you can be so bent that you think your bent status is normal. And that's a problem with this country. We have been so bent as a society. Now let's talk about the public. We have been so bent that our expectation of any leader, political or otherwise, is for them to offer not mental solutions, not ideas, not policies, not philosophies, but to consistently contribute to our chama, our funeral,
As
our
though that were
wedding.
enough.
Right. So that's the society we are in. Now, CDF to the public is, quote unquote, an easier route to government resources. But what is the trade-off? The trade-off, what we are saying is that you cannot do CDF and do parliament at the same time. One must suffer. You know, this is like serving mammon or serving the people. These politicians are serving mammon, right? And unfortunately, the people are used to that cocaine drip. 10,000 for fees and whatever. What needs to happen is we need to win the people of Kenya from the dependency of politicians for our livelihood to dependency on policy, ideas, philosophies,
and the implementation
the implementation of the same. Yeah. Because I can promise you, if your parliamentarian took time and sat in those committees, which they don't, they only show up for sitting allowance, they sign that book, and they disappear halfway through the conversation. They do not do those things because they do not affect how they're elected, and that's a problem. But if your MP today sat through committees, sat through parliament, and made sure,
read documents.
Yes, and read documents and made sure that government policy direction and implementation is done, none of us would need
You people are
CDF.
not fair.
Who is supposed to supervise the supervisor?
This is my question.
The people.
Who oversees the
Precisely.
overseers?
Article 1.
Yes. How do you get the people to do their job? Because the MPs clearly are not doing theirs.
Actually, by doing what we are doing here, and probably we need to go back. And for those of us who actually are on this particular side of the debate on CDF, we need to tell people that, first of all, CDF offends the Constitution.
How?
The principle of separation of powers.
Yes.
Number two.
You can't be executive and legislative at the same time.
Number two.
In this country, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, upside
Doesn't
down.
make it right.
Number two. CDF. If you think MPs, if you think governors are corrupt, you have never looked into the books of CDF.
Yep.
And just realize that no one has ever been jailed for misusing CDF. I was actually on that point and I don't want to lose it, because the person who gives the budget is the same person who does oversight. You know what they do? They pardon themselves. They know how to creatively account for it. It's only in CDF where you are allowed to have what we call partisan staff. MPs have got partisan staff, and they really don't care about that. The other reason is this, that CDF has become a trap, that the executive has all along known that CDF is a petty cash kitty for members of parliament. Do you know that the people on the ground do not know the difference between MP's own money and CDF? You have got a funeral, an MP writes you a check of 10,000 shillings, but what is actually said, Mheshimiwa ameleta hii pesa, people do not differentiate the difference.
Yeah.
It's become a trap in that the executive knows that these people use CDF badly. So every time you start opening up your mouth and criticizing government and being a member of parliament. Now, when you remember you're supposed to be a member of parliament and you're doing legislation and you're doing oversight, that file is actually pulled and you are reminded. You see this? As in, we have seen that within the Jubilee administration. William Ruto was part and parcel of that administration, and he doesn't look like he might be different from his brother. He's going to do the same thing. It's a trap. But finally, MPs have refused to account on CDF. Just like I'm telling you, all of us know that CDF is misused, it's abused, and done everything around.
Me, I don't know. I'm waiting for Auditor General reports. I'm waiting for EACC.
I'm waiting for
EACC.
Okay, let's say I agree with you. Let's say I agree with you.
Yeah.
The two of you have declared that you are Azimio supporters. You probably still are. What guarantee do we
Azimio does
have?
not consider me as one of their own.
Yes,
They refused.
What do you then offer as a guarantee that if Azimio was in, we would have a different scenario?
But you see,
It will not be different.
But
Would have had CDF
I
too.
don't. I've never heard him saying whataboutism. Listen, this is not an Azimio standpoint, okay? And let me explain to you. Number one, my independence of thought tells me we need to legitimize opposition. On that, I agree with the president 100%. It's way overdue. Let's change the constitution. Let's legitimize opposition politics in this country. 100%. I am also 100%.
Legitimize it or give it a legitimate
Actually, as
structure.
Mark builds on that, I know it is supposed to be a different point, Mark,
Give
when you
it
talk about
legitimate
opposition.
structure and legitimize.
Eric,
Oh, yes.
Eric spoke about
I'm nitpicking.
taking issue by issue, right? So
Let's
I'll tell
take a
you,
break.
Eric, the functions that we really are trying to now, in Mark's words, to legitimize opposition to handle is actually the function the constitution makers gave to Parliament.
Yes.
And Parliament failed on that. The failure of Parliament, and we are not, when we are doing diagnostics, we must actually say that it is CDF that ensured that Parliament does not play
not do
that
that
particular role.
Yeah.
And that is why now we are trying to become
Bas.
creative.
Let's take a break. Good.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
The transition to the presidential system, coupled with the exclusion of presidential candidates from simultaneously contesting parliamentary seats in a general election, created a novel political paradigm. The consequence is that the overall political leader of the minority side is effectively excluded from meaningful political participation and left to rely on the minority house leaderships to perform the function of oversight. No sound rationale has been proffered to adequately allay the sense that this anomaly is the result of a monumental oversight. I believe the idea of official opposition above and beyond mere minority parliamentary leadership makes tremendous sense in terms of institutionalizing governance, strengthening oversight, and deepening democracy. The other point is about it is ill-considered to interpret the rigid separation of powers established under the Constitution as the effective insulation of various institutions and organs of government from oversight and accountability. I believe that our government will become more responsive, accountable, effective when it's subjected to rigorous oversight. There is tremendous benefit in experiencing checks and balances in the course of policy implementation. For these reasons, I recommend and request that Parliament considers formulating a mechanism within its standing orders to facilitate participation of Cabinet Secretaries and the Chief Administrative Secretaries in parliamentary proceedings, particularly by responding to questions raised by MPs. Now, those two issues. One, about acknowledging that the biggest loser in a general election actually commands a lot of political power, even on the people who are elected, who then end up being in a minority side, and that then them being outside Parliament effectively locks them out from that role that they ought to be playing, the role that the millions of Kenyans have given this particular individual. Second is the executive has ministers, and members of Parliament feel that they do not get the answers directly from the ministers, so the ministers should come to House and answer questions. Your take on those two, Arnold?
My only problem with how he looks at it is that at least he's not expressly said so, but I feel like everyone says that we are going to use the parliamentary route. What very could be the functions of office of the official opposition, leader of official opposition? Those functions touch on the functions of Parliament.
Yeah.
Article 55 of the Constitution says that you can't do that if you can't do that through a parliamentary process. You will have to go through the popular initiative, the same process he didn't want to take us through. We have not even weaned ourselves of the effects of the just concluded elections. We were in campaigns for 5 years. Now he's actually just instituting another process. Is that what is necessary? Because there's the place of time and places when it comes to governance. As of now and here, is that really what we need? Because, politicians, especially in our situation, have perfected the art of keeping us on the run. So we are always in a spin. You don't remember your own needs. Like, for example, I asked a few guys who are like, we will be going out on the streets and demonstrating so that Cherera is reinstated. And asked them, you've spoken about the cost of living being so high, you can't afford food the way you used to. You've never gone to the street. Your children were sent home. You never went to the streets. You have had all those problems that affect you directly. But you want to go to the streets because you want to reinstate Cherera. It is not because you love her. It's only because a politician has said that let us go, or has suggested. So are you doing it for yourself or you're doing it for somebody else? They have realized that it's easy to put us on a spin and we can run around that. The president has done well. And I think in Mark's words, let me use his own words. Mark spoke about thought leadership. He's initiated, and I'm hoping that he doesn't want us to do it right away. He's initiated the process. He wants us to have that particular conversation. But does the president really have goodwill on some of these issues? That's where we start. I can only gauge that and respond to that from what he has done so far. What stopped the president from, for example, from fulfilling his own promise on 2/3 gender rule? What stopped him?
His was actually 50.
He said 50%, as in even meeting that, he just barely met it at the cabinet level.
Yep.
In the principal secretaries, I do not know whether my numbers are wrong or I'm the one who got wrong in the quantitative techniques.
No, they are wrong.
Is that at the PS
11
level,
of
they didn't get
49
it.
is 2/3.
11 out of 49 is 2/3.
Yes.
Well, your quantitative techniques class must have been a very interesting one. So, I'm struggling to understand.
Such a class.
I talked about QT. Mathematics has got a way of putting on a lot of cloth, and you don't avoid it. In elementary education, it's mathematics. It shows up as calculus, statistics.
Algebra.
As in, it shows up in very many
In very
forms.
ways, yes.
QT and everything else. And especially when it comes to QT, it becomes very, very stubborn. Anyway, so my point is that there's nothing that stopped the president, for example, from just addressing Article 27(8), both at the PS level and at the CS level. So even as he eloquently writes this particular memo to Parliament, it's a good letter, but he doesn't look like he really means it.
He's not showing leadership.
He is not showing leadership.
Okay.
So on all these other issues, even as they do, a number of the issues they suggest, by the way, and that is why the Right Honourable Prime Minister has said, respect the BBI ruling. Because there's just something about the BBI ruling. Like, I'll tell you this free of charge. Whether parliamentarians sit in Washington or in space to try and come up with a formula that can put BBI, or rather align it with the Constitution, if they have not read the BBI ruling, as in they don't need any other ruling, leave alone the one done by the Supreme Court, they just need to read the BBI ruling. And they will realize that you cannot align CDF into the Constitution, for example. Whatever the president is proposing, and I have seen a number of them say, we will do it through a parliamentary process. This judiciary they are in love with will actually just remind them.
We'll stop them.
We'll stop them. They're not going to win this particular war. And I think that there are things that are necessary at the moment. Education has gone so high. The president has, as in the cost of education has gone. And what are they telling us? That because that if we do away, have you ever realized how mad some policies actually are? Sometimes you sit back and you want to ask yourself, as in, do I live in a separate universe? So if you close boarding schools, you say that they make the cost of education high. The people who are sending their children there have not complained. There are reasons to why they take them there. Is that how you reduce the cost of education, for example? Have we taken care of, have we put in place tools and...
So wait, do you want ministers to answer questions on the floor of the House or not?
That is not the problem. The problem is Parliament should just be Parliament. They will take care of these problems without necessarily going around and playing around this. So for me, I think William is actually just sending us on a fool's errand.
Wild goose chase.
Because the things he suggests sound good to us. But technically, when you sit down, you realize that there are important things and urgent things that he can do now.
Let me tell you, I in my experience working with politicians across Africa, I have realized one thing. There are very few times where their political interests and the national interests coincide and we agree. Let me tell you, the statement given by the president was a political statement. And I'll tell you why it's a political statement. Where he sits, creating an office for the official opposition will keep Raila and Martha busy for a while, allowing him to do his agenda. That's number one. Number two, creating a constitutional moment is also a very good thing in terms of keeping the country busy so that we don't focus on bread and butter issues. True. However, what is being proposed, especially in the matters of ministers, CSs going to speak in parliament, especially on the matter of legitimizing opposition and giving it voice, we absolutely agree. Is it a big technical challenge to get it done? Can parliament even get it done? We're not sure. But the truth of the matter is, and I told Kenyans this before, when a politician's desires coincide with yours, be selfish, take it and run. The leadership that is supposed to be offered etc will not matter when those things are constitutional. All right? So this for me is my view. Kenyans have an opportunity to grab something for themselves. As politicians do this for their own political efficacy now. Our needs and desires have coincided for a small window of opportunity. Take advantage. Once we take advantage, that thing is codified not just for the William Ruto presidency, but for presidencies moving forward. That is very critical. Now, the issues that Arnold is raising are legitimate. And you have to look at the process. True. But let me tell you what my crystal ball tells me. I bet Azimio is likely to start a popular initiative. Okay?
What do you mean
Why?
by a popular initiative?
I mean a non-parliamentary route
Towards
towards
constitutional
constitutional
amendment.
amendment. Why? Because Azimio is sitting at the position now where they are not the head of state starting a constitutional referendum. And they will have support
Of the masses.
of the masses and the government because the president has already alluded to his desire to have those changes.
Yeah.
So let me tell you, as far as this thing is concerned, the stars will align on 80% of those issues. And me, I'm telling Kenyans, the window is there, let's grab it.
But we don't want constitutional amendment.
Why?
Do
There's
Kenyans
not-
want them?
We are Linda Katiba.
Let me tell you,
You know,
something.
if
This
the
will-
president-
In the Linda
If-
Katiba,
if-
including
I have-
Martha
if the
Karua,
president-
I have
we
been-
do not want.
I've been anti this Linda Katiba nonsense for a long time. Constitutional amendments are part of our constitution.
That's fine, but not now.
No, as in
Why not now?
So you implement what you have first. Like Arnold is saying, if it's about Parliament performing the job of the role of Parliament, then we do not have to worry about who is the leader and where the leader is.
you know
is
the
mistake
president-
you make. You cannot say
The
that you're not
president-
going to buy a fridge because your children have not exhausted watching TV. That's the logic. Listen, constitutions by and large are never going to be 100% implemented. Look, let me give you an example. The United States passed a constitutional amendment many years ago giving equal rights and freeing slaves, correct? But in the United States today, there are a number of states where slave labor for as long as you are a criminal is still enforced. How many hundreds of years later? So let's be clear, constitutions are never going to be 100% implemented.
That is
So
okay.
saying
We are
that
completely in
because we
agreement.
not implemented A, we cannot do B,
B.
is a defeatist
We are
argument.
completely in agreement. But
the-
the argument here you're pushing is that we need to amend the constitution because it's not working.
No, this is the point. The constitution we have
You
at the
cannot
moment,
say that what you haven't tried is not working, and you haven't tried it. Try it.
But we've had,
There are parts of it that
we've
are
had
not.
10 years of experimenting
Yes.
with this constitution.
Yeah, but not
but
on
we
these
do
areas.
not have the same constitution we had in 2010.
Yes.
This constitution is not exactly what we had in 2010.
True.
Because amending a constitution is not just by a referendum or
Ticking,
even
dotting the
parliamentary.
T's
We've done
and crossing the
precedences, we've
I's.
set patterns, this constitution is not the same as what we gave ourselves, because the Supreme Court has made some rulings. We've taken up a number of things. So the whole point is this. Why I do not agree with William largely on the things he's actually proposing is that I think it is a statement made out of intelligence. Being that, of course, that we know that probably in the back end, like he said, Azmi is thinking about kickstarting this particular process, and it will actually have support. When I was the chairperson of the TNA Youth League, I was the first person of the TNA Youth League. I remember somebody I'll not mention, a very senior person then.
Whom you will not mention.
Yes.
Okay.
Told us that
So what did you
if
say
the
his name
people,
was?
on the day we know that the people want the constitution to be changed, we will go in front of that choir and conduct it. We will lead it. So I think the president is just preempting a process that is coming.
Yeah.
Which
That's
is
your-
fair as a
that's your
politician.
view.
He is preempting it. As in, if you worked in the back end, is that people, what do people want? If this is what the people want,
Give it to them.
you will give it to them, even if it is poison. So, if the president really wants proper and vigorous oversight, can I tell you what he needs to do? Just abide by the Supreme Court ruling on CDF. I can tell you, Parliament will turn into an animal that will scrutinize everything.
Every single thing that comes out, which is
But-
what you're asking them to do in
Yes.
the first place.
But he's telling us that we need to create the leader of official opposition, a guy we can manage.
Yeah.
There are mechanics to manage that guy. And then we are giving Parliament, this is a bigger dog. This is a bigger animal.
And then take.
Then
Now,
the opposition.
we are giving them CDF. We want to ensure that this one is tamed. But we are giving it to a person with a few people. You're calling it legitimizing it.
Yeah.
And you know that you can manage them. You guys are Africans. So if the president is really interested in oversight,
Not just Africans, Kenyans. Kenyans.
so if the president really, you realize when they realized that CDF was delaying, you realize they had really become wild, right?
No, this let's be clear. Even the CDF proposal in that document is a method of managing Parliament, and I'll tell you why. You see, for as long as you hold the exchequer, right? If you want to frustrate Parliament, you delay disbursement of CDF.
Yep.
Then parliamentarians will come and queue and do whatever you want.
Yep.
So all this is control. All I am saying, so that we are very clear, there are very few times when politicians want the same thing as you. You may not want it for the same reasons. If you want to scrutinize the reasons of that letter, it is all political. But is it good for this country to have those conversations to move forward as a country? Yes. So for me, it's very clear. And I know we are about to give parting shots. It's very clear. For once, the president and Raila and most of this country want the same thing.
Most of the country.
No, let me explain to you why. Let me explain to you why. If you went to the people who voted for Azimio and you ask them, do you want
BBI.
do you want Raila Odinga to sit in Parliament oversighting government?
They'll tell you, yes.
They'll be ululating to say yes. If you ask government, the people in government, that do you want to keep Raila busy doing other things as official opposition? They'll tell you yes. It will manage him, yes. So here's the thing. At the end of the day, both sides want the same thing. They want to control Raila, and Raila will want a place where he's able to exercise the political influence he has. So trust you me, I can predict for you, there is no reason either side will say no. So they'll say yes. Because also they know they themselves might lose an election tomorrow. So they also need a soft landing.
They will say yes to it.
Yes. My final thing on CDF, let's be very clear. If we give Parliament CDF, then we kill oversight in this country. But unfortunately, now back to my point about leader of opposition. Every time Raila Odinga is quiet when something is going wrong in this country, we always assume opposition is one person. That's the problem. In this country, opposition is personified. It is not institutionalized. And that is another problem we have to solve.
All right. Parting shots, 30 seconds.
You personalize state, you will lose it. The day Michuki was the Minister for Transport, when he left, a man came in and said he also runs a matatu. Can we make institutions that work? Because if we are going to change the constitution with Raila in mind, with William Ruto thinking that if he loses, he might actually want to come back, and that he wants to govern without disturbance, and therefore he wants to keep Raila Odinga busy, we lose it. We need to actually take the painful decision. Take CDF to where it's supposed to be. Give it to governor if it's a must. It was a pilot project. It is not supposed to survive. There was parliament before CDF. There should be parliament
Without
after
CDF. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us.